Good morning, Aristo.
Good morning, Ron. It's afternoon here, by
Yes,
the
good
way.
afternoon, Aristo.
Okay. Let
Duh,
us
I knew that.
let
So
us begin.
today your topic is awakening abilities and systematic integration,
More or
or
less.
at least where you're starting.
Basically, it's going to be a topic that we'll probably run for for more than one video because it's extensive, and I wanted to express a systematic version of it for our listeners. Many people, well, not quite many, but some people have actually asked me because I said, well, I think this topic should be addressed. And they said, well, we're waiting, and I kept getting sidetracked and going into other topics. But I think I'll begin it today. In fact, this is so systematic, I'm referencing a single work that's influenced a whole bunch of other mystical works, written works, and traditions, and you can find its influence all over the mystical tradition spectrum from east to west. And it is a very well-known work in Sanskrit. It is called the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali or something like that. But anyways, pronunciation aside, there are 50 translations of this, and because I was never satisfied with most of the translations, I went out and got myself Sanskrit grammars and dictionaries and lexicons and this and that, and learned the language enough to translate it myself. Fortunately, it's only 192 lines. They're aphorisms or threads, and basically it's one of the most concise and specific manuals for esoteric integration. So I'd like to borrow from this in order to establish a kind of address all of these issues, because what the New Age does is take these things and presents them in a distorted form. And there are a lot of misunderstandings, and people go out and, oh, ego, that's ego that you've done, or we have to be non-attached, and non-attachment means basically rejecting everything, or basically all of these things that are based on religious philosophy that has polluted the mystical understanding. So what I'd like to do is basically extract the religious philosophy and present things in a concise and simple form outside of the cultural context of Indian traditions and all of that, using simple language. Um, Basically, although there are a lot of things addressed, yoga, the way this is presented, is not the be all and end all of mystical accomplishment and awakening abilities. However, it is a very fundamental first step, a first step that includes 10,000 other steps, let's put it that way. Um, but it's fundamental, and it can be adapted even in with respect to those pragmatists out there, those square pragmatists that believe meditation is a waste of time, or any kind of esoteric focus is an illusion. The other extreme from the escapists, basically, hardcore objectivists. And I'd like to say to these people that whatever you think, even if you don't believe in any of the esoteric potentials and realities and all of that, the psychopaths on the one hand do, and on the other hand, we are under mind control. So liberating your mind is important, and no psychology in the modern era especially provides us with approaches to liberate ourselves from mind control. The psychological institutions of the science of psychology have deliberately diluted any kind of potential that can liberate us from such things and have us view the world realistically. So the world is an illusion because we are hypnotized. When you are hypnotizing someone, they do not experience the real world. They experience the world of their hypnotic suggestions.
The
So
Matrix.
that the matrix, exactly. So this is yoga was always a systematic method that initiated extraction from the matrix. Even for prehistoric and Bronze Age peoples, they still lived in a sort of matrix because they were human beings, social beings. And so from there, you can become capable of awakening an intelligence in yourself, a greater state of perception that allows you to open up to the instinctive sense of abilities. Now, abilities are like a bird's wings. A baby bird does not fly off the bat. It doesn't just jump off and fly on its own, even though it's an instinct, even though it has a flight bladder in its belly and wings and feathers and all of this. It's completely hardwired to fly. It will not be activated unless it is taught by its parents. A predator will not hunt unless it is taught by its parents. It will die unless it is taught. Human beings are the same thing. The difference is they've killed off our parents, the ones that knew how to teach us. Let's put it that way. And any kind of knowledge that existed has been confused, diluted, replaced, hijacked, etc., etc. So now, necessity being the mother of invention, opportunities are coming back, and I'm seeing this everywhere. On the internet, I'm seeing comments about mystical topics that are far more insightful now than they were even 2 years ago. And so there is a kind of cultivation and an intuition awakening in the collective that seems to be very rarefied and dilute, because this is how these things happen. I mean, even the agricultural revolution in ancient times started from a few people and then spread, died out, spread again, writing the same way, everything, and the mystical traditions as well. So now we are coming into a kind of slow blossoming of this thing that hasn't reached 100-month effect. But just like other mystically inclined individuals in the past and the far past and the near past, I'm taking what I've experienced and what I know and representing it in the way that I feel modern listeners can understand. So let's get to the juice of it. Essentially, this author has broken down the process from the normal state to what we call the awakened state, let's put it that way, the lucid state, which is not just a mentally lucid state, but a state of energetic integration. The word yoga, they keep saying that it means union with God and all of this. Actually, it means harnessing. And to understand yoga, you need to understand the model that mystics presented back in the Bronze Age. You know, most of our esoteric traditions come from the Bronze Age. I mean, the written forms and all of this. Abraham existed in the Bronze Age, all of the Abrahamic traditions. The traditions of Buddhism extend from Aryan yogic, Indian traditions that go back to the Bronze Age. The same thing with the Chinese. The metaphors are basically Bronze Age metaphors. This is around the period of, shall we say, from 5,000 years ago to 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. In any case, the metaphor used here is the chariot, the war chariot. The war chariot back in those days was equivalent to a super hot car today, and just like today you had the elite would drive war chariots, and they'd buy them and they'd prize them, and the common folks would tell stories about them and go, ooh and ah, and I wish I had a war chariot, how cool it is. Gods would drive war chariots. So in order for the mystical understandings to carry, they used the example of the war chariot. So you have this thing called the Merkaba vehicle in Hebrew tradition, which is essentially another model of the war chariot. You had the Egyptian solar chariot, the chariot of the gods that Eric von Däniken said was ETs and UFOs and all that. But this pertains as well to the same example, the same paradigm. So we are not speaking about a dogmatic presentation here. We're talking about a modeling, a mapping. And you can have several maps that can help you navigate the same territory. But we're looking for a map that works. And this map is tried and true. So I'm not going to go and modify the model and say, okay, let's talk about a Lamborghini now instead of a war chariot, because the war chariot seems to address the situation far better. So basically the war chariot as a model of self has horses, it has the body of the chariot, it has the driver of the chariot, the guy that holds the reins, and it has the lord, or basically the guy who owns the chariot and is the guy who wants to go where the chariot goes, and he gives the commands to the driver. In wartime, he's the guy that has the weapons, the bows and arrows, and all of this. So these are 4 parts of being. The horses are our life force, they're our energy. And the body of the chariot, of course, is the physical body. The driver is the ego or the mind. The ego and the mind, the ego is the identity of the mind. When you refer to the mind, you call it by a name, or you say, okay, and associated with certain qualities. These are the ego. They're like the ID card of our personal minds. And of course, the Lord of the chariot, or the basic overseer of the thing, the one who gives the chariot purpose, is the higher self, or not the higher self, but the center of being, also known as the authority, or inner authority, or the true guru, or the master, the king. Now, kings were anointed, so they call this the anointed one. This is the logos, the guy who gives the basic instructions for everything, who has the grandest vision. And so this part of being is the Christ self in Christian terms. So harnessing yoga is integrating all of these parts together. It is not dominating one part over another. It is putting them in the right place so they can express their proper functions, their natural functions, and so we can be healthy and whole. In this way, what yoga does is says, well, where's the most problematic aspect in the chariot? It's the driver. And the driver needs to basically, because if the driver is completely deaf and blind, the chariot derails. The higher self can be whatever he wants. He can be powerful, the super lord, but he does not drive the chariot. He does not interface directly with the body and life force in that manner in terms of dealing with the navigation of probabilities in the physical world, in whatever dimension. If you throw out the driver of the chariot, you can still move the horses, but they're not going to have manifest purpose. They cannot relate to differentiated reality. This reality will then seem to be false or an illusion, because the vision of the higher self is different than the vision of the ego. In essence, however, these are all the same being. Instead of saying that the higher self is the true self and everything else is an illusion or an extension, you can say that the higher self is the brain of the operation, or the heart of the operation. Everything else is a different organ. The embodiment of the whole is who we are. We cannot identify ourselves with one part, even the Christ part, and say that this is the whole of us. Paradoxically, our individuality, if you extract it from our totality, it turns the totality into a fragment of being. I mean, we become whole when we accept the condensation and limitation of individuality. We become less limited. So the first thing that these yoga aphorisms deal with is this ego, is the driver of the chariot. And much of Indian tradition basically takes this analogy and says, look, the driver is the one that's problematic. He's the one that turns to the higher self and goes, what do I do? Or he's the one that's so freaked out about where the chariot's going that he just drops the reins. Or he's the one that listens to a totally different voice, to a bug that flew in his ear and is whispering completely different things than what the Lord of the chariot is saying. And of course, then the ego blames the horses, or the ego blames the chariot. It's a shoddy chariot, it's not my fault, or it's the horses don't know what they're doing. And yet, true yoga is where the arms of the ego, of the driver of the chariot, are in continuity with the horses themselves. There is no separation between the rein, between the horse, the body, and the driver of the chariot. Once this integration is realized and experienced, then the fact that there is no separation with the Christ self is also realized by proxy, because the self has learned the integrating function, a natural perception that says, oh, this is unity, okay, this is how things come together here, so coming together can occur over here and can occur over here. So there are 8 stages of that. This is broken down into 8 subsections, basically. This is not some technique-oriented methodology I'm going to present. I understand there are many people who have expressed themselves on your site that are against methods and techniques and specifics. Many people adopt the attitude that, okay, just follow your heart, follow your bliss, just do what's natural. But like the bird, we have no clue. We got the wings, we don't know what they are, and we have a bunch of liars whispering in our ears since day one, giving us false impressions, false assumptions, false messages, or sabotage. It's not that easy. So a few guidelines, in my opinion, are necessary. However, these are basically for those people who resonate. This is for those people. The parents do not flap the wings of the bird, for example. They push it out of the nest. The person who is going to benefit from this stuff is going to benefit because their own inner truth resonates and is given form by the simple elaborations that my experience has allowed to extract from this others, from stuff I've studied and stuff I've done and all of this. So you're going to recognize a lot of things that I'm saying, and a lot of people are also going to recognize a lot of things that I'm saying. And I'm going to start with the first limb or section, which has 5 subsections, which are basically the same thing that address the ego. We are not going to repress the ego. We are not going to talk about morality. This kind of harnessing, the harnessing of all the aspects of self into a unitary dynamic that is us, has nothing to do with morality. Morality is a crutch, in the sense that this is behavior. They tell you you have to do this behavior or else, because if you don't, it's going to hurt other people, this, that, or the other. Well, we're shifting from that mindset into one where you're not going to hurt other people, but you don't need morality to do it. You need natural discernment. You need a natural perception. You need natural lucidity and clarity, and enough of a healthy sense of well-being that you're not afflicted and driven to hurt yourself and other people because of all these distortions occurring in your reality frame, in your awareness field. So transcending morality is not something bad. You can be amoral if you're mature enough. You have rules, for example, in society that say, well, if you're under 18, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do the other. You can't see this, you can't talk about that. And to an extent, they're oppressive, but to another extent, well, children do not have enough experience, and they're not biologically developed enough, and this and that or the other. So adults fear for them. In the same way, we fear for each other and for ourselves, and put this whole morality, 10 commandments, blah, blah, blah attitude that has become oppressive. So harnessing takes us out of this. And that is the first step. The first step is logical and psychological. And it deals with 5 precepts that, again, are not moral dictates, but they're orientations of the ego that is now accepted. They are suggestions to the driver of the chariot toward attitudes that will allow them to approach the rest of integration. Because I shit you not, I have viewed people who have jumped this stage or who have denied this stage, and basically the intense energies and the intense breakdowns of preconceptions and conditionings when they occur prematurely at the level, because this is quite radical. We're talking about development of abilities and not just going around and doing what you feel is right in the sense of your conditioned framework. This is transcending the box for real. And if you don't do this in a way that takes the ego into account and the ego becomes your enemy, you can become worsely afflicted than you were. People with neurosis can become psychopathic or psychotic. One tiny little grudge can turn into, I mean, you look at the literature of occultists and they spend 90% of their time, most of them, attacking each other, using curses, and because it's easy. You have these people who are weak, abused in school, whatever, so they find, oh wow, I don't need a gun, the police can't catch me, I can do anything, all I have to do is just curse somebody. And if you move directly and jump all these stages and don't have a foundation, you can actually do this. And you will resonate with what one author calls the psychopathic archetype. And it will possess you, literally, because these afflictions do not have a foundation of context and healing. They've suddenly become more powerful than the ego, and the ego submits and adapts to them, and so the logos is completely supplanted by this psychopathic pretender, just like the psychopaths want to do in our society. So the first precept is called nonviolence. This is what Gandhi promoted very much. However, we need to understand that it doesn't mean go around repressing yourself and just don't hurt anything. What it means, if you look at actually what the text says, it says that, look, the roots of violence is rooted in righteousness. Dogmatic preconceptions result in self-righteousness. And self-righteousness then bloats according to all these other unresolved issues and becomes a distorted form of insanity for the ego and leads eventually to violence. Exactly, tyranny. And you know this with religions, you know this with politics, with political correctness. It's instigated by the matrix. And so we need to reverse our righteousness without affecting our sense of rightness. And basically this means that, well, when you reverse and that is done by reversing dogmatic preconception. It means basically staying open in the situation and being observant and all of these things. But again, this isn't a technique, this is basically a suggestion. And it says one of the requirements for the ego to gain a healthy foothold is to be nonviolent, but nonviolence is a result of diffusing the causes and effects that lead to self-righteousness. This includes all of those people that have been harassing you, on your site, that basically, oh, you're too negative, or you're too this, or I'm tired of you talking this way. They come from a position of righteousness. This makes you angry and creates violent emotions in you, but it also reflects violent emotions that they're repressing in themselves. They want to keep things under control and toned down because they're denying the shadow of rage. And this has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the causality that is not allowing us to heal. The ego can step back and say, oh, I have a role to play in this. And it's not a role of being given orders or commandments. It's a simple change in orientation. So when you move into that frame of basically relaxing your sense of preconception and understanding that assume is a word that makes an ass, out of you and me, the way the word is spelled, basically. So assumptions, and of course another assumption is the fact that people use assumptions in order to counter every argument, including what I've just said. Any argument can be countered and anything can be turned against you. But the point is, we come to the second aspect then, honesty. Honesty is the second suggestion for the ego in order to be liberated from affliction and to be able to be supportive of the rest of the transformation integration process. And you've talked about this a lot in terms of telling the truth. This is actually translated best as authenticity and being genuine. It doesn't mean going out and saying, well, I've heard this and this is what I believe is true, so I'm going to go around and tell everybody, or I've done this and I'm going to tell everybody.
That's religion.
Exactly. And it doesn't even mean being a journalist of your own life to other people or wearing your heart on your sleeve or something like that. When you're dealing with afflicted society, you need to be careful and empathic in terms of what other people can take and what they can't take. And of course, that ability is developed more and more as the sermon develops along this path and such. In any case, this means being genuine. And that means taking your mind and having a talk with yourself and saying, who am I? I mean, in every given moment, is this really who I am? Is this my truth? Is this my spontaneous, natural, genuine response? Am I being honest with myself to the best of my ability? Because honesty, does that mean going and finding the subjective truth underneath a pile of rubble? It means being where you are. And if you are where you are, then you can get to where you want to go. If you're not where you are, then you're completely lost. The chariot driver has completely lost the reins and doesn't know where they are, and it's going all over the place.
You can't get there from there. You can only get there from here. That's been one of my sayings for a long time.
Exactly, and this is at the root of being genuine. Hypocrisy is toxic to the ego. Even though it's convenient, and even though it's convenient to lie, to whatever, it's best to just honestly express that I'm not going to tell you. I don't care what you say, or I don't feel like saying, or not saying anything, or changing the topic, or whatever. But actually, when you learn to lie as a convenience, then your ego learns to lie to you. You learn this. You completely lose your discernment because lying becomes a habit, not just where you want to use it, but everywhere. The ego basically considers lying as a natural function. So it will lie to itself. It will take lies of other people as truth because it considers them more useful, even though you know better. I mean, your discernment can be operating, completely on some level of intuition, but your ego can completely rewrite the script for you because on some level you believe you will be, saved a lot of hardship and pain because of it. Somebody can come to you and your heart can say, well, that person's really not looking for my best interest, but your ego can say, look, man, that that's too painful, so let's rewrite the script a little bit and things will be better. So the ego basically needs to not learn in the sense of training, but it needs to become comfortable that being truthful and authentic is better for it. It's better and it's in its best interest because ego is selfish naturally. There's nothing to be ashamed of in terms of considering ego selfish or ego or whatever. It's just when it's selfish in a healthy manner, then it's free. It doesn't get defensive. It doesn't attack. It doesn't lie to you. It's not your own worst enemy. So authenticity is the second dynamic. The third dynamic is integrity. And this is translated as not stealing, as not taking what is not yours. And this is another thing you've mentioned, and you even mentioned it with the CVAX today, society and all of this. We use government to keep us from stealing from each other and violating each other. Stealing is basically, the deeper interpretation is violation. Somebody who does not violate and can heal their own violation. If you violate, you cannot heal your violation, and thus you lack integrity because you are fragmented. Violating and being violated are two sides of the same coin. Whether you're on one side completely or another side or a little of both, it doesn't matter. We're looking to get the ego to basically orient, not to completely say, okay, ego, take care of the coin. That's the whole integration's job. But the ego needs to take on a stance with respect to violation to understand that instead of worrying about violation, it can look toward the positive, toward integrity. Integrity means basically being honest. It's again connected to the two previous things. It's being honest. We know what integrity means. It means basically treating people as they deserve to be treated. It's the golden rule. Applying the golden rule means you have integrity. At the same time, it doesn't mean taking the golden rule completely to the letter because they're intuitive. Every situation is different. There are modifications. You may want to deal with psychopaths a little differently because they're wired differently. In any case, there's a creative dynamic here. But as long as integrity is a precious gem, then you will never be poor. People think that I have integrity and I've been robbed and blindsided and all this. Yes, because you're lying to yourself. You're a victim of your own lack of discernment, of your own fragmentation. You can't use one. That's why this guy basically has taken all of these steps and said, okay, these are fundamental dynamics. And if you integrate them, then you can actually take that first step that has a lot of steps within it. It doesn't mean that, people tend to blame one thing in their life. I've been good, on Monday, but my whole week has been bad, or I haven't stolen and I haven't cheated on my wife, but how about all these other things? And it's not, again, that's morality. You don't do this in order to prevent harm done to you. You do this because it's your own natural, healthy expression. And that is the path to well-being. That is the path to a more meaningful life. It's just that it's completely been distorted by controllers, by matrix manipulators, and all of that. So I want to run to the fourth step, which is basically, it accumulates the other steps, and it's the most misunderstood step. And it's basically, if people who know about this stuff in Sanskrit will know it as brahmacharya. And this is basically interpreted as celibacy. So people who read on yoga, they read up to this point and they go celibacy. It's like, okay, that's it. Close the book. That's not for me.
That's what I would do.
Exactly. That's what I've done. I mean, I've gone through hell just struggling with this. Until finally I got into looking the word in the dictionary, and it's basically not celibacy, it's called the way of Brahman, and Brahman is basically the creator. So this is the way of the creator, the way of natural creation, the way of being in tune with nature and absorbing everything and learning. Because in Indian tradition, people would go through their youth learning and being educated, just like in other societies, and then they would get married and etc. And toward their middle age, then they'd go and do yoga or meditate and stuff like that. So the tradition said to keep the young people in check and keep them socially integrated and to basically indoctrinate them, we have to channel their sexual force into repression in order to channel it toward, being fanatics, see, the more stress you feel in life, the more an indoctrination takes hold. This happens in hazing rituals. Many societies will make you go through trials in order to make you more loyal to the way society is. Punishments, schoolyard beatings, this, that, or the other. Celibacy is a prolonged form of stress instead of actually being healthy and expressing sexuality in a healthy way. And India basically, like a lot of these ancient societies, is to a great degree sexually repressive, while it's liberated in other ways. Women are repressed in many ways in general society, etc., etc. There's a fear of the feminine. Even the Native Americans, if a woman would go through her menstrual cycle, they'd exile her from the village because it would cramp the style of the shaman. The energy of the menstrual flow was so powerful that the shaman would feel demasculated and he wouldn't be able to deal with everything. Because there are intense energies the male is challenged to integrate when a woman goes through her menstrual period. All of the toxins go out. And so the male says, oh, these are the things my biology can't deal with, and they're going to turn into cancer. That's why men that's one of the prime reasons men live less than women are used to, at least. Because women would expel their toxins through the menstrual blood, and men have no such way. They go to war and cut their bodies open artificially. So, in any case, this is the way of nature. This is the way of natural sensuality. This is the way of being open to new things. This is the way of the Creator. Is the Creator celibate? How can you create anything if there isn't an eros about it, if there isn't a kind of existential sensuality about it? The point is, now this is how the Westerners have twisted the whole image of the Creator. Architect, engineer, some guy with a hammer and a nail that goes around and pounds things in place, and yet creates something out of nothing instead of creating something out of himself or herself. Creation is a copulation, it's a mating, it's a production, it's a self-elaboration in terms of divine process, etc. So, people who wanted to take sexuality out of the equation or warp it or make it extreme and all of these things and distort it, people wouldn't fight wars without so much repressed sexuality, for example. They'd want to have a good time. But, of course, then you have the orgiastic dynamics, this, that, or the other, and these are also the result of other forms of repression. The point is that one who is authentic, who is truthful, who is basically free of preconceptions is going to have to deal with their sexual energy even before they actually move into that kind of thing. They're going to have to deal with their desires. And so the way to deal with them is to ask yourself, how would the Creator deal with them? If I am in the image and likeness of the Creator, there must be some kind of similar dynamic in the divine state as there is in the ego state. Maybe smaller or formed or differentiated, but there must be some attitude. How do I deal with it? What would the Creator say? Well, be natural. Nature is all here, but be natural as a human being. Don't imitate some other species. Don't imitate an angel. Don't go and imitate this, that, or the other. Realize where your position is in creation, because that is what liberates you. That is the way of the Creator. The fifth way is probably another, and I will conclude with this, is a very problematic dynamic. It is called non-attachment. This is where we come to blows with all of the escapists, because they say reality is an illusion, don't be attached to it. This is incredibly misunderstood, because people, including the Indian traditions, many of them have said, well, if I'm not going to be attached to something, I have to reject it. So the way these things work in some of these, cases is that, well, I enter a stage where I have to be disattached from money. So I go into full poverty and starve myself to death. I have to be disattached from relationships. I go live in a cave and don't talk to anybody. I have to be disattached from my ego. I blank out my individuality and go into some kind of catatonic state. And this is liberation. And yet, people come back and say, well, that was cool. Okay, and they promote this. And religions have promoted this because it doesn't change anything. If religion sees that it doesn't change anything, it will support a mystical process. However, non-attachment is not an accurate translation of this word. The word basically means not grasping, not clenching. The Orientals have a good way of saying this, is when you go to a river and you want to drink, you do not clench your hand into a fist. You do not try to grab the water by grabbing it as a fist and then bringing it to you. There's nothing there. Also, you do not just leave your hand open and say, oh, okay, I reject the water, I'll put my hand in the river, and then I'll take it out, and if there's no water, then that's God's will. No. You do, again, it goes from the previous, the way of the Creator. The Creator gave us the capacity to cup our hands, to actually, in a relaxed fashion, not grasp or clench or constrict, and also not ignore by keeping the palm open. We put the palm in a relaxed position for the purpose of allowing the water to come in, and then we lift it up effortlessly to our mouths and we quench our thirsts. That is how you relate to things in terms of the ego. If the ego can get that through its head, so to speak, then it realizes that it doesn't have to give up anything, but it doesn't have to struggle for anything either. And it takes time, of course, and these are basically the introductory ego suggestions, the precepts, the principles that one can actually use as guidelines in order to put the ego in a place where it is on your side, or on its own side, basically. And once that's done, and it doesn't have to be, okay, that's done and you can move, you begin this dynamic and it moves. And then as you begin it, you go to the next phase as well. Now the next phase is far more subtle. It provides the orientation, and it's talking to the ego, but this time it says, okay, ego, these are all the things you need to do in order to hold the reins and navigate and do it even if you don't have the higher self talking to you. The way the ego is, it can still benefit from all these things. There's psychological dynamics.